Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Resonant Arc Book Club. This is week 3 of Mistborn, The Final Empire, and we read chapters 19 through 29 this week. Lots of interesting developments. One really major setback for our characters. So, before we do anything else, though, I first want to let everyone know about the book we're going to be reading next. So, this next week, we will be finishing Mistborn, Final Empire. We have just the last section of the book, basically just read to the end. So, if anyone needs to, people need to be made aware of the next book we're going to be reading so that they can, purchase it or rent it from the library or whatever they're going to do and get ready to start reading it. So, we are going to be reading Crime and Punishment. I cannot pronounce the name, but I think it's Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a book that Kaysen has brought up a couple of times on the podcast, and it's a book that I'm very interested in reading from a philosophy perspective. I think that the idea it explores is really something that has piqued my interest. So we're going to take a little break from fantasy stuff, and we're going to read Crime and Punishment. Again, Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is the book we'll be reading next. So look into getting that by whatever means you want to during the next week, so that when we're done with Mistborn, we can just go right into to Crime and Punishment. Unfortunately, Hyun, Emperor Teresa, is not selected this time. We will be doing a vote again at the end of Crime and Punishment. For those who do not know this, we switch every month who selects the book. So the first book I selected because I wanted to, dive into The Witcher. Then we let you guys vote on the next book, and that's what was chosen with Mistborn. Now we're letting Kaysen choose a book. Well, I sort of chose it, but I knew it was something he'd be interested in talking about. So, do something that he would really like to talk about. So we're doing Crime and Punishment next. Then we'll do another vote at the end of that one, and you guys will pick the next book. Then we're very likely going to be going back to The Witcher again, because I want to continue that series. So, okay. Just wanted to let you guys know about that first. Heon says, I'm in the middle of it. I want the letter done by the weekend, end of the week, and at least. Okay, I'll talk to you about this afterward. Because I do want to get back to Jakobine and not make him wait too long. Okay, so here we go. What's up, Dude McGuy? I, as usual, will go over what's in my notes first, and then we'll go to Brandon Sanderson's annotations. I did not actually take very many notes this week. I only took 2. And honestly, I don't know how relevant they are now that I look at them. There's not really much to discuss. There was just me having a sort of gut reaction to something. And in fact, these come pretty close to the end of the week's reading. So let's actually start with Brandon Sanderson's annotations, and then maybe I'll come back to this if I can think of a point to spur it off into a discussion. But okay, let's go to Brandon Sanderson's annotations first. Here we are. So, in the early chapter, we see what Kelsier is sort of doing, when he's sneaking around at night. I thought it was kind of cool how he pretends to be a noble when he goes to the informant guy and sort of tries to get information out of him. And then he immediately turns around and becomes a Ska, dresses up like a Ska to become an informant to, what is his name? Strath or something like that. Venture, the lead of House Venture. And sort of feed him some half-truths, false information to get the houses sort of suspicious of each other because he's trying to start a house war, right? So I thought that chapter was really cool. Doing some really interesting stuff. Um, I think though, like something that struck me while I was reading is when Kelsier goes to where the army is hiding, basically, like where they're sort of like sending their troops and training them. And it wasn't like it was fine. Like he's got them hiding. You know, he sort of like has these like cracks in the earth that they it's like a very defensible position, very hidden place. That all worked for me. That all made sense. Sort of like the way he was dealing with he talked to them and sort of like emboldened them. I thought all of that worked. The part that to me seemed a little weird was the end with Bilg. And he writes something here that I found very interesting, and it actually addresses the thing that I didn't really like about it, and he seems to agree. He seems to have made a change to this scene because, you know, he was getting feedback for that, but I don't know, there's something about the scene that didn't work for me. Anyways, let's just read what he says. Um so he was originally going to have Vin go there in place of Kelsier, and he's like, unfortunately, I came to my senses and I reworked the scene. It would not have made sense for Vin to go there. So obviously that was the right choice. Um, Obviously it worked out well, as I was able to do some other things, such as have Kelsier show off for the troops. That's part of the thing that I thought was weird, but we'll keep going. However, I didn't want to spend too much time out here. When Vin had been the one coming to the caves, I'd planned 2 or 3 chapters. When it came to when it became Kelsier, I knew I wanted to shrink it to 1 chapter. I think that was also a smart idea. That's why we get kind of this weird time passes omniscient bit at the beginning of the second section. One final note for this chapter, Bilg. I preferred him dead. This is the guy Demo fought at the end of the chapter with Kelsier's help. In the original draft of the book, I had Kelsier, through Demo, kill Bilg in the duel. I thought this was appropriate and would be the sort of thing that Kelsier would do. In addition, I really wanted to emphasize the ruthless edge that Kelsier has. He's willing to do whatever he has to in order to see his goals achieved. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. It's that conflict, the happy, joking Kelsier mixed with the hard, ruthless rebel leader, that makes him interesting to me. Joshua was the big complainer on this one. He felt that my books are too optimistic for something this harsh to be done by one of the main characters. He felt that readers wouldn't go along with it. Indeed, it was one of the main points that my alpha readers brought up. Some liked it, others hated it. The scene did its job. Eventually, I went with Joshua's suggestion, however, and left Bilg alive. To me, this kind of castrates the scene. However, I suppose the most important element still got across, and Kelsier gets to remain less tarnished as a hero. Still, I would have liked the death to remain, if only for future books. I'll eventually post this scene as a deleted scene from the book. So here's the sentiment that I agree with him on. When he wrote leaving Bilg alive, that is, castrates the scene, I kind of like got that sense from reading it. I was like, this scene feels, I don't want to use the wrong word, like weak. Like it doesn't come across as strong as I think the sentiment of the scene is hoping to be. Like it just seems kind of random that all of a sudden Kelsier's like, hey, let's find somebody who, among us, who like isn't like 100% with us or whatever, and let's like, make him a public example to like get everyone to be like super stoked about the army and optimistic about our chances and stuff like that. There was something about, it's so hard for me to like describe why, because I thought about it like all week. There's something about the way it's done that feels a little tropey and contrived, I guess. And ultimately it didn't really work for me. It would have been one thing if like Kelsier's presence there sort of like sparked this dude, to like sort of lash out at him, like maybe he's been a problem or whatever, but like it's seeing Kelsier up close that sort of like maybe he says something to him or comes at him somehow, and Kelsier realizes I have an opportunity here now to put this guy in his place, rather than like, let's search somebody out. I'm going to use allomancy to riot his emotions to make him outburst. Then I'm going to make an example of him. Now, if that had been the case and he had ended up killing Bilg, like that, I agree, probably would have been a step too far. Because it's like the guy isn't making trouble right now. He's just sitting there like in the mess hall, or the equivalent of the mess hall in the caves. You know, just sitting there, and he's like, point me out somebody who's like not like super on board. Oh, there he is. I'm going to riot that emotion out of him. Then I'm going to freaking like manipulate this guy in a duel to kill him. That's a little too ruthless. However, what I would have really thought would work is if Bilg kind of came at Kelsier just of his own volition. Kelsier didn't write him to do it. He just kind of came at him. And he was like, okay, maybe there's more people in the army feeling this way. Maybe he looks around and he can sort of like sense to a degree like how many people are looking toward Bilg, and he's sort of causing like a rift or a division within the army. Then he's like, this has got to be dealt with right now. Right? And so then having Demo fight him and him using allomancy to manipulate that battle and kill Bilg, I think would have been really effective. And effective for two reasons. Not just effective in this scene within its own context as a, what do you call it? Self-contained chapter, but also for the setup down the line when the army is destroyed, right? Because it felt to me like this was like the result of this scene with Kelsier doing this and sort of showing off and sort of like giving this sort of artificial confidence to them, like, oh, if I'm on your side, you know, like, then you'll be able to move faster, like Kelsier, treating Kelsier almost like he will grant his godlike powers to the troops, right? The whole point of doing this is to set up his guilt when Eden takes the troops out to try and fight the garrison and they all get slaughtered, and he goes, this is my fault. Because when that part came and Kelsier's blaming himself, like, I get from a sense that, like, there's something very true about when you're the leader, no matter what position, no matter what industry you're in, whether it's a company or whatever the organization is, you're the leader. You have to take responsibility when something fails or when something goes wrong. That means you had an oversight. You didn't train your people the right way. People didn't know their job right. So there's a certain part of that I sympathize with. But, I mean, who expected Eden to do this? Eden was just a complete moron. And Kelsier sort of like just feeling that level of guilt over a choice that was just mind-blowingly stupid on Yeden's part that no one could have seen coming. Because he had never given that sense about himself. Yeden had never felt rash beforehand to me. So it felt like this scene and the way that it progressed was this kind of contrived setup to be like this big impacting character moment for him when the army's destroyed, so he can like take the blame and the burden on himself. I don't know. I didn't love it. I didn't love it when I read it. And if you guys have an alternate perspective on that, I'd really love to hear it. But I think that if like this problem had come up to him and he had chosen to deal with it in this way, you know, it's a bit of an arrogant, egotistical way. And he uses his allomancy to help Demo kill Bilg, and everyone realizes, ooh, we have this Mistborn who will, like, you know, help us when we're fighting and sort of like lead our hands or whatever, and we can't, they get a a sense of a complex, like an invincibility complex due to it. That I think would have worked a little better. I don't know. It's hard to say. What's up, Booster Damas? Chocolate Rob says try comparing your feelings on this next week. Okay, well, if there's something else coming up that will help to give context, then maybe I'll leave it there for now. But this was it's not like the biggest deal. It just something about it didn't quite work for me. So, that being said, there was some stuff that came later that really did. Let's see. So he's talking about feruchemy, which is like the terraceman magic or whatever. What's his name? Sazed uses. When I was developing this world, I knew I wanted the keepers to have the fantastic memories. I realized that feruchemy, I think it is, feruchemy, would make the perfect magic system for Sazed and his people. When I decided that I could use metals as a focus for this magic system, something that made it much more interesting because it put a definable limit on what could be stored and how much of it could be stored, I knew I had something really good. I like to use multiple magic systems in books, but I like it when they all have common elements. Feruchemy and allomancy are like different aspects of the same concept. They both do some similar yet different things. There'll be a lot more about this in the text. I really liked the concept of feruchemy as a magic system. Like the concept that you can increase your physical strength, or even they said things like weight or age or things like that by weakening yourself for a certain period of time and storing that away in the metal. And then, when you're ready to use it, you can call upon it, and then bam, you have like all this extra power. But there's like a yin yang to it. It's like you have to sacrifice, make yourself ill, weak, old, all these things for a certain period of time to sort of store that up into the metal, and then you can kind of call on it. And so I don't know. I really liked that. Like, I thought that was a really interesting. Again, I think that's what many people would say is Sanderson's like strongest sort of aspect to his writing, is how thoroughly he thinks through his magic systems and explains them. They all make sense. You know what the rules are. You know what the limits are. None of it feels like it makes the wielder all powerful, and so the way that the characters sort of resolve their problems with magic, it feels like they are geniuses. They're using the tools in their toolkit in really smart ways, and none of it ends up feeling like a Deus Ex Machina or a coincidental save the day sort of a feel, because we all know what the limits are, and the characters stay within those limits when they use the magic, and it's just like, here's another clever use of this thing that maybe the average person reading wouldn't have even thought of. The pewter, I forget what it's called, pewter dragging, is like one example of just like a clever idea behind using the natural limits and the physics of how allomancy works to do something that you go like, oh, that makes sense, and that is like so strong in Sanderson's magic systems. Let's see. Restless Oblivion says, at the same time, if it just happens randomly, it takes away some of Kelsier's agency and other examples of how manipulative he can be. Eon says, would you say Mistborn is thematically driven or more plot-driven fantasy for fantasy's sake? I wouldn't say either. Like, I'm sure that there is some... I'm sure you could say, like, someone could pick out some thematic elements in it. He actually said something about that in one of these annotations. I can't remember where it was. But he says something about, this is a book about basically a girl, like, overcoming her... what did he say specifically? I'm going to butcher it. But he said, this is a book about a girl who overcomes her insecurities sort of rises up. Oh, because he was talking about the mythology of it, right? He was saying this is not a book about the history of the Final Empire and all this stuff. It's a book about this particular character overcoming her personal problems and a group of people resisting just because even if they know they can't win, even knowing that they can't win, the idea of them fighting and dying in the pursuit of resistance of this thing that they can't stand for anymore. And that was actually really strong with when he brought Menace back, right? So Menace comes back and talks to Kelsier after the army had been defeated and says, like, this was a great death. This was a giant, like, victory, like the greatest victory that the Ska have ever had against the Empire. You know, like, the army was completely slaughtered, but you actually took out a garrison, and, like, that's incredible. And Kelsier, like, looking at that and saying and seeing how, like, that the Ska are so defeated and have for so long been subdued like this, and to say, like, they have fallen so low that they accept this absolute massacre as a victory is what I have got to keep fighting for. Like, that sort of, like, ignites him again in that moment when he's there depressed and guilty and full of shame. He's like, that's what I'm fighting to change. Like, that's what I'm fighting for, right? And that sort of carries on into the next scene with all the executions and stuff. But I'd say, like, that at its heart is really, like, what the series is about. So in terms of, like any kind of theme that applies, like a moral theme that sort of, like, applies generally to you know, anything that's could be used as a metaphor for real life social issues or anything that's happening in real life, I don't think so. I think this is more of a plot driven story. I mean, character driven too, but I mean, like, it's more just about a really interesting world that he's built, and really interesting magic systems, and how these people are sort of, like, resisting in such a harsh environment, I guess, against, like, impossible odds, kind of a thing. Okay. Let's move on to the next part of this. Let me get back to this again. I love this. This aspect right here is one of the things I find most interesting in this book as well. It says, the terrorist religion and the Keeper's inability to find it is one of the most interesting and tragic elements of the society. I liked this concept of a race that collected and preserved knowledge of the past for those who would come. However, I couldn't have them be experts on their own religion, since that religion hides many of the clues about the nature of what's going on in this series of books. That necessity gave birth to the idea that they're searching for the most important of religions, their own, yet haven't been able to find it yet. They have everyone else's knowledge memorized, but that which they want the most is still lost to them. This is what makes me so interested in the Keepers and in the terrorist people in general. Like, you know, the Keepers, like he said, like, all throughout the book so far, Sazed, you know, keeps bringing up, like, all these different religions that he has studied and preserved, because the Lord Ruler abolished any knowledge of the time before his ascendancy. So he wants that all to be forgotten. All the different cultures, all the different religions, all the different philosophies before his ascendancy, he wants to eliminate from the earth. And so these Keepers are, like, basically his greatest enemy, in the sense that they are trying to preserve all of that stuff. And the great sort of, like, tragic internal conflict for them is that they remember all these different cultures, all these different people, all these different philosophies and religions and ideologies, but they don't know their own heritage. And that's what they're really searching for. And that's what motivates them to do this in the first place. I thought that was really clever. And I don't know, it just makes me so interested. Like, the mystery behind them is so interesting because that, of all the different religions, of everything else that the Lord Ruler wanted eliminated, that one's the most important one because that's going to hide, or it's within there that we'll find the secret to defeating the Lord Ruler. He fears the Terracemen the most of all the people. He writes about it in all of the headers to the chapters. You know, we're looking at basically the Lord Ruler's logbook and his sort of journey to his ascendancy when he was a hero before he sort of whatever happened on the day he ascended, you know, making him into the villain. He lived long enough to see himself become a villain, kind of idea. And it's fascinating to me that the answer to who the Keepers are, or who the Terrace people are, is sort of like where that knowledge is hidden. What makes the Lord Ruler immortal? How can we actually get at him? It's hidden there in that religion, and that's the one religion they just know nothing about. So that actually adds some urgency to Sazed's attempt to translate the logbook, the Lord Ruler's logbook that they got from the palace, right? He's translating this and giving that to the crew members to read so that they can hopefully find something there. And, you know, think about how urgent a find that must have seemed to have the Lord Ruler's logbook of his journey to ascendancy. Maybe we'll find the answer here, but, you know, as we read later, unfortunately, there wasn't as much information as they were hoping for. So anyways, just loved that concept. I thought that was super cool. Okay. Let's see what some people are saying here. Jake of Link says, oh yeah, the Vin and Marsh scene was great. Yeah, it was really good. I liked that scene a lot as well, where Vin and Marsh talk to each other. Restless Oblivion says he also has a flair for very cinematic or maybe visual writing. There have been several scenes that I could picture almost perfectly as a movie action scene or an anime. He does explain his action really clearly. I do like that. Restless Oblivion again says, yeah, or the fact that he admitted he uses POVs just to set up cool shots or moments. There's another one toward the end that I'm specifically thinking of. We have Leonard Yop, I think it is. If you like the Terry's mythology, you will love the rest of the trilogy. I'm really hoping, yeah, because he seems to be setting that up as like the cornerstone, like the key to defeating the Lord Ruler is like learning who the Terrace people are. So I'm super stoked, and I'm upset that I already know that we're not going to find the answer in the last couple hundred pages here. We're not going to find the answer in this book. We have to read the next one. So, anyways, let's move on. If you hate Spook's dialect, I apologize for this chapter. This is the place in the book where I spent the most time on it. I really like some of the phrases here. I tried to make the dialect focus on rhythm and sounds, making it alliterative and interesting, simply to say out loud. In case you need it, here's a loose translation of the exchange in the chapter. I can never understand what he's saying. I don't know how it was for you guys, but I find it sounded interesting. And he kind of writes that here, or maybe it's in the next one or something, but he writes how he based that off of somebody in a forum that he knew who sort of like had this ability to write really nonsensical posts, but that like flowed poetically. And that was sort of like his basis of inspiration for the dialect that Spook speaks. And it does flow. Like, there's a certain, like, rhythm to it, for sure. And I find that interesting, but I can never understand what the crap he's saying. So he's got a little translation here. And I appreciated that. So yeah, if you want to know what Spook and Kelsier and Breeze... I think Breeze was the one who was confused. He didn't know what they were talking about, right? But Spook and Kelsier and Ham were all... sort of like using his sort of unique dialect to speak back to each other in an attempt to sort of like rouse or get on Breeve's nerves, get under his skin a little bit. Rob says, alliterative, reading sound like Clack, Ent, or Lois Lane. Oh, okay. Clark. Repeating sounds like Clark Kent or Lois Lane. I feel you. Anyways, yeah. Anyways, go to Brandon Sanderson's website and come to the annotations for Mistborn, chapter 24, part 1, if you want to take a look at that. I don't know. I'm showing it to you right now. I don't know why you would come look at it. Anyways, whatever. Moving on. I also highlighted this part. I do like how Han comes across in this scene. His personality as the one who doesn't fake or play games in the crew makes him really work for me as a character. I liked that too, because like everyone in the crew, you know, they've got like a little mystery to them, you know, and that sort of adds to Finn's sort of like hesitancy to believe anything they're telling her at first, right back at the beginning of the book. But Ham is like just a totally honest dude in this crew. A crew of thieves, we have one guy who is literally like just completely honest. And the one line that really struck me was when he said, I'm going to go ahead and join the mercenaries who are going to fight against the Scott army that they had been raising the whole time. He said, I'm going to go ahead and join them. And basically, Kelsier says something to him, I can't remember what, but Ham says, I'm not going to turn on the men that I'm fighting with. If I'm going to join this mercenary group, I'm not going to attack them. Like, I'm going to be on their side in this battle. And then Kelsier's like, well, fine, just, like, try not to kill, you know, too many of our own people in our army. But that's the kind of guy that Ham is. Ham is just completely honest and loyal. And he's a really nice sort of contrast to the rest of the characters in the crew. And this chapter, I think, did a really nice job of sort of establishing who he is. And I really liked that. I really liked that a lot. Here, talking about Eden again, you know, kind of like I said earlier, I don't have too much more to add to this, but what Eden did was just completely moronic. Just absolutely stupid. And I had kind of a hard time believing it. Now, I do know, and he said this a little bit earlier in some of last week's annotations, that sometimes he had to sort of like really speed along some of the character development for the characters you don't see on screen that often, like Eden. Like, Eden was very distrustful of Kelsier earlier in the book, right? But then somewhere at the midway point, we see that he's really become endeared to Kelsier and really, like, believes in him. And, you know, Kelsier's delivering on everything he promised. And so Eden starts looking up to him a lot more. And then at this time, we're supposed to believe that Eden thinks, due to Kelsier's powers, that they are literally untouchable and that they can win. He's become completely deluded. And so he's like, yeah, let's go freaking attack the garrison or whatever, right? I would have liked a little more filling in on how that thought process led to that, because now I understand that by doing that, you could bog down a book that, I mean, at least some people might feel is a little bit slow-paced, and maybe it would ruin the surprise when you learn that the army is being slaughtered. And it's like, what is happening? How could this happen? That was like, what? It was like a really big, impacting, oh, crap kind of moment. Like, see, Rob says, how long did it take Eden to make his stupid decision? Because it is 2 days after Kelsier returns that we hear the news to test their strength. Yeah, but at the same time, it's like the entire plan was sort of based on secrecy, right? Like, the whole point was that they were going to draw out the army from Luthadel, even the Lord Ruler himself, if possible, get them out of there, and then they would march the army in. So the whole purpose of the plan was like based on them not knowing, not revealing that there's an army. So just to go out and say, let's just get some practical battle experience, and let's, test the strength of our army. Let's see what we got going on here. Would, even if they had succeeded and they had gone back and hidden and they hadn't been found, that they still would have alerted the Lord Ruler and alerted the Empire to the fact that they're raising an army, which would completely destroy the surprise that is the crux of the plan. It's literal nonsense that he decided to do this, and I have a very hard time believing it. And to me, it all sort of boils down to this, that it was contrived for the purpose of giving Kelsier this character moment where he can reflect on how two purposes actually. To have Kelsier reflect on how he's been leading and how he's sort of like given this presence, how he's sort of like given the allure or this version of himself that to everyone else makes him seem like he's this mystical, invincible, figurehead. But also sort of like draw the suspicion of the crew members who are all sort of questioning how far he's going with this. To the point where, they bring it up in the next scene. And I think Breeze is the one who kind of bursts out with it. And then Kelsier takes him, or they go to the executions, and Kelsier sees like, don't ever question my authority again. Like, this is what we're fighting. I'm not here to like boost my own ego. This not the point of this. And you've all doubted my intentions being egotistically driven. That's not the case. This is what we're fighting. These executions, this oppression is what we're really fighting. But see, to me, that moment isn't earned entirely because I just don't see Yeadon doing this. I do not understand. I do not understand how he could have thought that was in any way, shape, or form a good idea. Rob says, as Menace shows, the Ska just don't get it. They're totally incapable of grasping the significance of things. It's more than just fallout from what Kel did in the caves. Well, if you're talking about the soldiers, right, I'm totally with you on that. But you think that this is true for Yeadon as well? Because it's Yeadon mostly where I'm so confused. Because he's privy to the plan. He's sat in on all the meetings. He knows the importance of secrecy in all of this. So what was he thinking? So either I would have liked to have seen more of his thought process that led into why he became so rash and why he decided to do what he did. And you run that at the risk of spoiling the twist and the plot that all of a sudden the army's being slaughtered. But I think it needs to be earned a little more for it to make sense. Or, I don't know actually what the other one was. What was the other thing I was saying? Or, I guess you alter the scene earlier slightly and really like give everyone a reason to believe like, oh, we're untouchable. I don't know. Hard to say what it is in specific that, in particular or specifically, that didn't quite work about this for me. St. Boo says, I'm 40 minutes late to the stream. What did I miss? Well, it's a lot, I guess. It's kind of hard to recap everything. Restless Oblivion says, perhaps the enthusiasm of the men in the army after Kelsier's visit just snowballed out of Yeadon's control. Well, I don't think that's true. Because Yeadon, well, actually, have they revealed that yet? It seemed to me on the reading, maybe I missed something. It seemed to me that Yeadon sort of led that charge. That's what Menace, I think, says, right? Like, they didn't just go without orders to do this. It seemed to me like Yeadon was on board and sort of led them to this charge. He never seemed to be a very good leader. I mean, that's true. Rob says Yeadon and his resistance was completely incapable before Kel came along. Then suddenly, they get a massive boost to their egos. I believe that, okay? I'm completely... yes. Absolutely. They think they are stronger than they are. They believe that they can do this. All of that I believe in. That's not the problem for me. It's the fact that the entire crux of the plan from the very beginning was secrecy. The only way it will work is if we hide this army and then we spring it in the right moment to occupy Luthadel. It has got to remain a secret before then, though. Otherwise, it won't work. That was made like so incredibly clear when they were drawing up the plan. And Yeadon was there in all of those meetings and took part in that and understood that, at least it seemed to me. And that he would then, I mean, even if he was successful, even if they took out the garrison, they slaughtered them, and then they retreated and went back in the caves and had not been found. Let's say everything went perfectly, and they had not been discovered, or at least their whereabouts. You know, we don't know where they're hiding. The Lord Ruler cannot locate where the army is hidden. The Lord Ruler and the Final Empire would still be made aware of the fact that there is a large Ska resistance. They would be put on alert. They would double their efforts. They would then become they would defend themselves I mean, they could call upon millions of soldiers is what they've said in the past from all the different dominances. They would basically blockade the crap out of a place. There'd be no way they're getting in now. They would be made aware there's a resistance. We got to smoke this thing out. They're put on alert. So it makes no sense to me that Eden would do this, knowing that the entire crux of the plan rested on secrecy. Secrecy. The army had to stay a secret until the moment they spring the trap for this to work. Because, again, they're never going to match the numbers of the Final Empire's armies. And the whole thing was like, are they going to even be able to keep or hold the city after they occupy it? I don't know. That's up to Eden to do. We're just going to get them in there. We're going to raise them an army. We're going to get them in there. We're going to grab the A-team. We're going to pull out. We're going to be done at that point. It's on him now. So he knew that from the beginning. So why on earth would he do this? Even being empowered through his boosted ego because of Kelsier's visit, I could see that giving him all the confidence in the world that he could succeed in this particular fight, or that they could succeed in their plan, but he would still be completely ruining the entire plan by revealing that there is an army at all. And that, to me, I don't follow, because we're not in the mind of Eden at any point in the book. He's not a character that we ever get his point of view. So we don't see how his logic took him there, and he didn't seem like a dumb guy. Like, anytime he was interacting with the crew, he seemed like he was a sharp dude. Obviously callous and cold and not really trusting them very much, but he didn't seem like he was incapable or stupid. And then now all of a sudden we see how dumb he is, right? So again, I don't think that this was like the wrong choice for the story necessarily. I just don't think it's earned. I don't think that it's justified for Eden to have made this choice, because we haven't seen that he is this kind of thinker. And in many ways, I kind of saw him as a different kind of guy from the scenes in which we do see him. So, I don't know. Rob says he's simply an incapable dumbass given too much power. Passionate, but incapable. Okay, let's move on. In this chapter, Breeze finally gets to confront Kelsier with the emotions that I hope a lot of the book's readers have been feeling. It needed to be said. I planned these two scenes together for a reason. I realize that the executions get a bit graphic, but the power of Kelsier, but the power of having Kelsier confront his crew in front of such a terrible scene of death and destruction was important to me. Breeze's outburst isn't the only thing in this chapter that needed to be said. It was finally time for Kelsier to admit some truths to his crew. Of course, they had grown to the point where they could accept them. Here is where the book takes course toward being more focused and more intentional. It isn't about a heist, it's about overthrowing an empire. Now, that part I did find effective, is that, Kelsier finally admits like his real reason for doing this, and this is the appropriate place to do it. So it's like Breeze and the rest of the guys that might have been there for the money, they sort of come around and they're like, okay, now we're unified in our vision of what we're actually fighting for. And that to me worked. I really liked that. And the entire idea of the Lord Ruler just showing up and just executing random people. These weren't even people who were in the army or who resisted at all. They were just random ska. They just, you guys get punished for what happened, you know. There was actually something, oh man, I just remembered this, but I didn't make a note of it. Now I'm sad that I didn't. There was something that happened in that chapter that sort of talked about the ineffectiveness of it. I think it was something like the Lord Ruler, through this action, essentially reveals that he's not all-powerful, that he's not omniscient, because he feels the need to demonstrate like this. The fact that he felt the need to do something so terrible shows that he's actually afraid and that he is actually vulnerable. And, like, otherwise, why would he even bother with this, you know? Like, I thought that was actually quite powerful. That perception or perspective from Kelsier. I think it was when, I think it was when he was telling her about, oh no, Vin said to him that she felt him soothing. Or it's not soothing, I don't know. Whatever his allomantic power was that he's using to sort of like manipulate people's emotions. The Lord Ruler, he does it like on this gigantic scale across like the whole city. And Kelsier is saying like, oh, that's not even possible, right? Now, two things to this. There was also a hint when they go back to the caves. Should switch back to me here. There was a hint dropped when they go back to the caves when they're seeing if there's anyone left behind, and she's able to see the fire from really far away, and Kelsier goes like, holy crap, how did she even see that? There's a hint there that she's more sensitive an Allomancer, maybe a more powerful Allomancer, and I think this as well was a setup for that too, because she kind of just like drops it and just sort of trusts him because he's her mentor. But the fact that she can sense the Lord Ruler's power in a way that he can't, I think is also demonstrative of the fact that she's a more powerful, naturally more powerful Allomancer than him. So anyways, it was interesting to me, though, that his perspective was still true, despite the fact that that he's wrong about what the Lord Ruler's capable of, because he kind of denies that that's possible. He's like, no, it's not possible he's able to do that. I think it is possible, and it is true that he is doing it. Maybe it's accomplished to some degree with all of the different obligators that they have in the different places. You know, what Marsh delivers as like the schematic for the city, and we have all these places where these obligators are at, and they're constantly like manipulating people's emotions, and that's why the Scott in the city in particular are more downtrodden and more beaten than in other places. It could be, you know, due to that, but it seems to me that it's true that the Lord Ruler has this power that is subtle enough that Kelsier is sort of like saying, no, that's not possible or whatever. But Vin can feel it. But then still, his perspective, I think, is really poignant in that the Lord Ruler would not do something like this, would not have this public execution if he didn't feel vulnerable, if he felt no fear, if he was actually invincible, if he was actually all-powerful, and if he actually knew everything. You know, so to him, it's like this means we can get to him, right? And I thought that was really, really cool. I liked that moment. Rob says, Kelsier brought up how oddly powerful she was when they had a pushing match. Oh, that's right. That's right. That's actually a good point. So the way that Allomancy works with pushing, right? Your own weight affects how powerfully you can push. They show this again when they start their, what do they call it? Pewter dragging, I think it is, where they run really fast. And he runs and jumps over some soldiers and pushes on the guy, and the guy like crumples to the ground. He's like, oh. And then Vin runs and jumps and pushes on the second guy, and he's like, oh. He like gets hit a little bit and goes, whoa, what happened? And she's like, oh man, Kelsier weighs a lot more than me. So when they were in a pushing match, when they were training, somehow, I mean, Kelsier, due to the way the physics of pushing work, should have just like pushed her right away. But she pushed really hard somehow in such a way that he noticed, like, that's odd. That's more powerful than it should have been. That's a good point. So he's dropped a lot of clues throughout the story that suggest how powerful Vin really is. So, looking forward to learning more about that. I didn't think there was anything in particular from this other than the when he reveals the ninth metal is gold and what it does. That was really unique. I felt like really trippy experience too, but really interesting power where you can kind of again it complements Atium in that Atium lets you see a little into the future as to what your enemy's going to do, and the complement metal to that gold allows you to see the past, so to speak, but maybe like a version of you had you not made certain decisions. It's not made entirely clear what that is because it's such like an abstract experience. But it's really cool visually. I don't know. There was something about that reminded me a little bit of like how I felt when I watched The Neverending Story, and he like goes up to the mirror and he looks in the mirror and you see like the true version of yourself in the mirror. It was kind of like one of those moments where you're like a little creeped out. It's like, oh, what's going on? This is weird. Like, that kind of feeling, and it was just really well written. I really liked that. The force is strong with this one, says Rob. Yeah. And then he talks a little bit about Elend. And how he becomes a viewpoint character here for the first time. And I thought it was really interesting. It was kind of one of those like, holy crap moments where Elend just like basically tells Vin like straight up that House Venture mines the Atium. It was just like, what? Like there was part of me that was like, he's got to be saying this in an attempt to try and get her to do something. Like he can't really trust her that way, right? But no, since we do get into Elend's viewpoint, he just made a huge mistake because he trusted her. He believed that she was a good person and that he could trust her. So that says a lot about who Elend is. And I'm excited that he will probably become more of a main character here moving forward. But when he asks for some spies from his father to follow her, it's kind of like, uh-oh, like, this is not going to end well. There is going to be some major conflict here. So, anyways, really interesting, though. Really, really interesting developments. I got really hooked again, like I was saying. I was reading on the train on the way down, finished this week's reading, and was like, oh, man, like, I have to keep going, so I read quite a bit farther past it. But I have less than 100 pages left to read now, so we're getting really close to the end. So that is the assignment for this week. We're going to finish the book, read from chapter 29 to the end, which I think is chapter 38. But there is some extra stuff on the end too. So, but I think the extra stuff on the end is like a preview for the next book. So the epilogue. So it's chapter 38, and then there's an epilogue, which ends on page 643. Wait, is that right? And then he has, I think, some kind of preview for the next book or something on the back of it. The Hero of Sages, available now in paperback. Here's a preview for the concluding volume of the Mistborn trilogy. So anyways, so page or chapter 29 through the epilogue. Restless Oblivion says, I agree with him not making Elend a viewpoint character earlier. It adds to the intrigue and secrecy of his character and the Vind-Elend relationship early in the book. Yeah, I agree as well. Rob says, in chapter 27, Kelsier mentioned his trainer, Gemel. You learn more about him in a side story called The 11th Metal. Oh, nice. Yeah, I was kind of interested in his mentor, right? Like his relationship with his mentor. I thought that was, he alludes to something that I would like to read more about, so it's good to know that. Okay, anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me. Again, go ahead and look into either if you're going to rent Crime and Punishment or if you're going to buy it or whatever, however you want to get your hands on this. That is going to be the next book we'll read. So we're going to read the last part of the Final Empire and finish it this week, and then we'll be picking up with Crime and Punishment after that. So Until then, thanks for joining me, everyone. You guys are great. And I'll see you next week for the end of the Final Empire. Have a good day.